So today I was given a video to look over by a certain sister in Christ who strongly disagrees with my Calvinist position on soteriology. She didn't make this video, but sent it from this one person named Mitch. I'm not going to bother with the rest of the name, because the channel is honestly hard to figure out with the title, especially since I've never heard of this guy. Anyway, so let's see what can be found on the video.
Hey, there is much about Christianity in general that is troubling and defiant of reason.
Wait a second. A Christian sent me a video for me to take seriously, and the first words are that Christianity is troubling and defiant of reason?
There is much about Christianity in general that is troubling and defiant of reason.
Is this guy even a Christian?
The fatal flaw here is that the so-called messianic prophetic portrait is largely a Christian fiction that, among other things, regularly relies on fabricated prophecies as well as tendentious misquotations and misapplications of passages from the Hebrew Scriptures. These antics betray the fact that Jesus was not the Messiah. Here we see how early Christians ignored the actual ritual for atonement of sin in Jewish law in favor of misappropriating the Jewish Passover celebration, which had nothing to do with atonement for sin, in an effort to give theological significance to the execution of Jesus. As the Bible itself demonstrates, Jesus was not the Messiah, and Jesus was not the atonement.
Whoops, I guess not. Let us go on.
However, certain forms of Christianity, certain Christian schools of thought, if you will, are more troubling and reason-defiant than others. And it seems to me the most troubling and reason-defiant form of Christianity is Calvinism. So, what causes me to say that Calvinism is the most troubling, reason-defiant form of Christianity? Well, the heart of the problem is the Calvinists' conception of the biblical God as the autocratic author of evil in the world and the arbitrary judge or savior of human beings who were ontologically wounded by the fall God had, for his own pleasure, decreed and arranged for them. Come with me back to the beginning of the story so I can explain what I mean.
I had to take down part of the video for this response, since according to YouTube's notice on his video, his original video, it is age restricted due to nudity, and he does shows pictures of Adam and Eve that can cause YouTube to be suspicious. But anyways, he goes on to say that the fall of Adam and Eve was ordained according to Calvinism. This would be correct if we believe God ordains everything. Then he quotes Calvin, where Calvin says that not only was the fall ordained, but for his pleasure, God's pleasure, he, according to God, arranged it.
According to Calvin, it was all God's idea and doing. God set it up for, quote, his own pleasure.
Yes, why do you think that he did so? What does God do that is pleasing to himself? It's for his plan and his glory. The Bible certainly espouses upon this. But of course, Mitch goes on to say that because Adam and Eve just did what God ordained, they are cursed. He then states that this is the equivalent of the following scenario.
Of Jim Henson punishing and banishing the Cookie Monster for eating too many cookies, and Kermit the Frog for complaining about being green.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
The God of Calvinism goes on to regard every human being ever to live as liable for the misdeed of the first man and woman.
They are also liable for their own actions as well.
Even though, as I've noted, what the first man and woman did was entirely according to what, as Calvin put it, God had, quote, ordained by his decree, unquote, for, quote, his own pleasure.
That doesn't give you an excuse to not take responsibility for your own actions.
And no other human beings participated in the act. Now, to add insult to this injury, the God of Calvinism has a plan to save human beings from all of this. But the plan applies only to some human beings. Which human beings? The ones the God of Calvinism decides to save. Why does he decide to save some and not others? Because he is pleased to do so. What happens to the others? You see, according to Calvin, God can do whatever he pleases, and whatever God pleases is necessarily good. Calvin wrote, quote, everything which God wills must be held to be righteous by the mere fact of his willing it. Therefore, when it is asked why the Lord did so, we must answer, because he pleased. It's nothing more nor less than that. According to Calvin, God, quote, is a law to himself, unquote.
According to the Bible, he is the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment. A God of truth and without iniquity. Just and right is he. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 4.
There's nothing about the people whom the God of Calvinism decides to save that makes them any more worth saving than the people whom the God of Calvinism decides to damn. He just picks some people and not others. It's totally random, completely arbitrary.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Calvin recognized that this would trouble people. He hadn't taken complete leave of his senses. He counseled his co-religionists to respond to justice-based objections to all of this as follows. Whenever they presume to carp, let us begin to repeat, who are you, miserable man, that bring an accusation against God? And that, Calvin contends, is the only answer that his co-religionists should give. He wrote, we shall gain nothing by proceeding farther. Translation, that's all we got. A losing argument only goes so far.
Nay, but, O man, who art thou that repliest against God? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, why hast thou made me thus?
So, that's the God of Calvinism, an arbitrary autocrat who, as a law unto himself, may do whatever he pleases to whomever he pleases, whenever he pleases, including, without limitation, arranging the fall of human beings and then sending some of them off to eternal punishment for being and doing precisely what he had predestined them to be and do. Beings whose sole purpose for existence is, as Calvin put it, quote, to glorify God by their destruction. The good news, of course, is that no such God exists.
You, sir, are an atheist. You don't believe any God exists.
The bad news, sad news really, is that so many people believe in and worship this God, his non-existence notwithstanding, and that they regard as the supreme expression of justice the obviously gross injustice that comprises the centerpiece of their belief system. And according to the founder of their belief system, the best answer they have to objections is, who are you to ask questions? We know from experience what sort of beings use that kind of tactic.
Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man, for I will question you, then you answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if you have understanding. Who determined the measures of it if you know, or who stretched the line on it? Whereupon were the foundations of it fastened, or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Or who shut up the sea with doors when it broke forth from the womb? When I made clouds the garments of it, thick darkness as a swaddling band for it. Marked out for it my bound, and set its bars and doors, and said, Here you may come, but no further. Here shall your proud waves be stayed. Have you entered into the treasuries of the snow, or have you seen the treasuries of the hail, which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war? By what way is the lightning distributed, or the east wind scattered on the earth? Who has cut a channel for the flood water, or the path for the thunderstorm, to cause it to rain on a land where no man is, on the wilderness in which there is no man, to satisfy the waste and desolate ground, to cause the tender grass to spring forth? Does the rain have a father, or who fathers the drops of dew? Out of whose womb came the ice, the gray frost of the sky, who has given birth to it? The waters become hard like stone when the surface of the deep is frozen. Can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades, or loosen the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth the constellations in their season, or can you guide the bear with her cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you establish the dominion of it over the earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that abundance of waters may cover you? Can you send forth lightnings that they may go? Do they report to you, Here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or who has given understanding to the mind? Who can number the clouds by wisdom, or who can pour out the bottles of the sky, when the dust runs into a mass and the clouds of the earth stick together? Can you hunt the prey for the lioness, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens and lie in wait in the thicket? Who provides for the raven his prey when his young ones cry to God and wander for lack of food? See now the behemoth, which I made as well as you. He eats grass like an ox. Look now, his strength is in his loins, his force is in the muscles of his belly. He moves his tail like a cedar, the sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are like tubes of brass, his limbs are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of God. He who made him gives him his sword. Surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the animals of the field do play. He lies under the lotus trees, in the covert of the reed in the marsh. The lotuses cover him with their shade. The willows of the brook surround him. Behold, if a river overflows, he doesn't tremble. He is confident, though the Jordan swells even to his mouth. Shall any take him when he is on the watch, or pierce through his nose with a snare?
I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be restrained. Yet you asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered that which I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I didn't know.
So this guy is a fool according to the Bible in Psalms chapter 14 verse 1, and that he is a naturalist who lacks the ability to spiritually discern Christianity as mentioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 14. I would recommend him to read Romans 9, especially the context of verse 20, which was quoted earlier. It really scares me now that it seems that fellow Christians are so afraid of Calvinists, or they're so skeptical and worried about the doctrines of Calvinism, that they'll result to going to atheists now to be the teachers. Atheists who are fools and cannot discern the spiritual things of God. This, I hope, gets resolved, and that they will cling to at least spiritual Christian teachers and hopefully use their arguments or something that they learned from them when responding or sending something to people such as me who are Calvinists. Till then, Shalom Aleichem.